The wind was a predator, a thing of teeth and claws that tore at the lonely cabin on the high ridge. It howled with the voices of ghosts, spirits Elias Thorne knew by name. He sat by the fire, the orange light dancing across the deep lines etched into his face, each one a map of a sorrow he could not outrun. The whiskey in his glass was a poor companion, offering no warmth against the chill that lived in his bones. He had come to this unforgiving corner of Montana to be forgotten, to let the silence and the snow swallow what was left of his soul. But the silence was a liar tonight. Outside, beyond the sturdy pine walls, the blizzard was a screaming shroud, and in it, something was dying. He felt it not as a sound, but as a discordant note in the symphony of the storm. A tremor of wrongness. He set the glass down, the click of it on the rough-hewn table unnaturally loud. His hand went to the rifle propped against the hearth, a gesture as ingrained as breathing. He moved to the window, wiping away the frost with the heel of his hand to peer into the maelstrom of white. For a moment, there was nothing but the furious dance of snow. Then a shape, a flicker of darkness against the blinding pale, stumbled, fell and rose again. Another, smaller shape clung to it. Not a deer, not a wolf. Human. A fool's errand to be out in this. A death wish. He watched, his jaw tight, his heart a cold, hard stone in his chest. He had made a covenant with this wilderness. Leave him to his ghosts, and he would not interfere with its brutal indifference. But the larger figure fell again, and this time it did not rise. It curled itself around the smaller one, a desperate, final act of shelter. The stone in his chest cracked. With a curse that was swallowed by the wind the moment it left his lips, Elias pulled on his heavy sheepskin coat, grabbed a lantern, and stepped out into the teeth of the world. The cold was a physical blow, stealing his breath. The snow was thigh-deep, a relentless, sucking tide. He followed the tracks, already fading, his lantern a fragile bubble of light in the overwhelming dark. He found them huddled against his own fence line, the barbed wire singing its thin, cruel song in the gale. A woman, her face pale as marble and rimmed with ice, her arms wrapped around a small child who was little more than a bundle of rags. The woman's eyes were closed, but as his light fell upon her, they fluttered open. They were the color of a stormy sky, filled with a terror so profound it silenced the wind itself. She tried to speak, but only a dry rasp escaped her frozen lips. She clutched the child tighter. Elias knelt, his own past rushing up to choke him. The memory of another storm, another frozen body. He pushed it down hard. "You're safe," he said, his voice rough and used. The words felt foreign in his mouth. He wasn't sure if she heard him, or if she even could. He lifted the child first. She was terrifyingly light, her small face peeking from the wraps, her eyes wide and dark and utterly vacant. She made no sound. Then he turned back for the woman, scooping her into his arms. She weighed next to nothing, a fragile thing of bone and will. As he carried them back towards the forgiving light of his cabin, he felt the fragile, terrifying weight of a life in his hands for the first time in a decade. Inside, the warmth was a shock. He laid them on the bearskin rug before the hearth, the firelight catching the gold in the woman's half-frozen hair. He worked with a grim, practiced efficiency, stripping away their wet, icy layers. The child, a girl of maybe 5 or 6, was unresponsive but breathing. He wrapped her in his driest, warmest blankets and set her close to the heat. The woman was next. Underneath her tattered dress, her body was a canvas of fading bruises, a roadmap of cruelty that made his fists clench. On her shoulder, a brand, a stark, ugly symbol of ownership he didn't recognize but understood in his gut. Possessive mark. He found a faint pulse in her neck and gently chafed her hands and feet, forcing warm broth laced with whiskey between her lips when she was coherent enough to swallow. For hours he worked, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the undiminished rage of the storm. He was a man who had forgotten how to care, yet his hands moved with a tender certainty he thought he'd buried long ago. He was tending to more than just their bodies. He was tending the flickering embers of his own humanity. Her name was Annalise. He learned that 2 days later, when the storm had wept itself into a sullen gray calm and she could finally speak above a whisper. The child's name was Lily, and Lily did not speak at all. She would sit by the fire, her dark eyes following Elias's every move, a small, broken doll clutched in her hands. There was a stillness about the child that was more profound than any scream. Annalise spoke little, her sentences clipped, her gaze always darting towards the door, as if expecting the devil himself to break it down. She told him she was a teacher, from a small settlement 2 days east. She said they were traveling to find her brother in Oregon. She did not say what they were running from. She did not have to. The brand on her shoulder and the terror in her eyes spoke for her. Elias did not ask. His cabin was not a place for questions. It was a place of unspoken truths, of shared wounds. He saw the way she flinched if he moved too quickly, the way she positioned herself between him and Lily at all times. He was a large man, his presence filling the small space, and he knew he was another threat in her world of them. So he made himself smaller. He moved slowly, deliberately. He would leave food on the table and retreat to the far side of the room to mend his tack. He spoke only when necessary. "Wood's low, there's more stew. The snow will hold for another day." His voice was a low rumble, like rocks shifting deep underground. Annalise watched him, her fear slowly warring with a desperate need to trust. She saw the calloused hands that could split a log with one blow but could also gently place a log on the fire without a sound. She saw the loneliness in his eyes, a familiar abyss that mirrored her own. One afternoon, he found Lily staring at the shelf where he kept a small, carved wooden horse, a relic from a life before this one. He took it down without a word and placed it in her small, outstretched hands. Lily looked at the horse, then up at him, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than emptiness moved in her eyes. Later, while he was outside splitting wood, the rhythmic thud of the axe the only sound in the vast white world, Annalise approached him. She carried a steaming mug of coffee. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but clear. He stopped, leaning the axe against the block. He took the mug, their fingers brushing. A spark of warmth, startling and real. He just nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant, snow-laden peaks. "She hasn't had a toy since." Annalise trailed off, her throat closing. He didn't press. He understood the language of things left unsaid. "The doll," he said, his voice gruff. "The stuffing is coming out the next evening." While Annalise stirred a pot over the fire, she watched him sit at the table with Lily's broken doll, with a needle and thick thread from his mending kit. His large, clumsy-looking fingers worked with painstaking delicacy, stitching the torn fabric, reattaching a loose button eye. He worked in the pool of lantern light, his brow furrowed in concentration, and Annalise felt a dangerous crack in the wall around her heart. Safety was a mirage. She knew that. But in this small, warm cabin, with this silent, wounded man, it felt terrifyingly real. Days bled into weeks. The deep winter held them in its grip. A fragile routine formed. Elias would hunt and chop wood. Annalise would cook and keep the cabin. Lily remained a silent shadow, though she started leaving her carved horse next to Elias's plate in the mornings. A small, unspoken offering. They existed in a quiet space, communicating in gestures and shared glances. A nod of thanks. A hand offered to steady a step on the ice. The shared duty of banking the fire for the night. The slow reveal of their pasts happened not in words, but in scars. He saw the network of thin, silvery lines on her back one morning when her dress shifted as she reached for a pan. She saw the ragged, puckered scar that ran along his forearm when he rolled up his sleeves to gut a rabbit. They were both marked, survivors of battles they did not speak of. One night, a nightmare clawed its way out of him. He woke with a yell, the names Sarah and Jacob torn from his throat. He sat bolt upright, drenched in sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs. Annalise was there, standing a few feet from his cot, a blanket clutched in her hands. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him with an understanding that went deeper than pity. In her eyes, he saw not a monster, but a man who was also haunted. He swung his legs over the side of the cot, burying his face in his hands. The silence stretched. "My wife," he finally rasped, the words tasting of ash. "My son. A fire. I was away." He couldn't finish. He had never spoken these words aloud. Annalise moved closer. She hesitated, then placed a tentative hand on his shoulder. Her touch was light, but it anchored him, pulling him back from the edge of the memory. "I'm sorry," she whispered. It was all she said, but it was enough. In that shared moment of grief, in that quiet acknowledgement of loss, a bond was forged, stronger than steel. He began to see her not just as a survivor, but as a woman of incredible strength. He saw the intelligence in her eyes when she helped him calculate their dwindling supplies, the grace in her movements as she stoked the fire, the fierce, unwavering love she poured into the silent child. He found himself watching her, the way the firelight caught the red in her hair, the determined set of her jaw. A feeling, long dead and buried, began to stir within him. It was a protective instinct so fierce it was almost violent. A primal need to stand between her and the world that had hurt her. He would look at her and Lily, two small flames of life in his desolate world, and a silent vow would form in his heart. "I will not let the cold take you. I claim this duty. I claim this right to protect you." The thaw came slowly, then all at once. The world began to weep, snow melting from the eaves, the promise of spring a distant but tangible thing. With the melting snow came the return of the world. And with the world came its monsters. He saw the rider first, a black speck against the vast, muddy expanse of the valley below. Elias was on the ridge, checking his traps. He watched the figure for a long time, a cold dread coiling in his stomach. The rider moved with purpose, slowly but surely making his way towards the cabin. He ran back, his long legs eating up the ground. He burst through the door, his face grim. Annalise was reading to Lily from a worn book, her voice soft. She looked up, and the fear was instantly back in her eyes. A storm cloud eclipsing the sun. "A rider," Elias said, his voice flat. He didn't need to say more. Annalise's face went ashen. She scooped Lily into her arms, her body trembling. "No," she breathed. "He couldn't have." "How?" "Doesn't matter how," Elias said, barring the door. He moved to the gun rack, checking his rifle, then a shotgun. His movements were calm, economical, the movements of a man who had known violence intimately. "Silas," she whispered, the name a curse. "He won't stop. He thinks we belong to him." "No one belongs to anyone," Elias growled, the sound low and dangerous. He looked at her, at the raw terror that threatened to swallow her whole. "He will not touch you, or the child. I swear it." He pressed the shotgun into her hands. Her eyes widened. I can't." "You can," he said, his gaze hard, unwavering. "You point it. You pull the trigger. You think of her." He nodded towards Lily, who was now hiding behind Annalise's skirts, her small face buried in the fabric. Annalise looked from Lily to the heavy weapon in her hands. Her knuckles were white, but a new resolve began to burn in her eyes, chasing away the fear. She nodded, a single, sharp movement. The rider was closer now, a man dressed in black, sitting tall on a powerful black horse. He stopped 100 yards from the cabin, a silhouette of patient menace. The waiting was the worst part. The silence in the cabin was thick with it, broken only by the frantic beat of their hearts. Elias stood by the window, a statue of deadly calm. Annalise stood by the hearth, the shotgun held tight, Lily clinging to her leg. Finally, the man dismounted and began to walk towards them. He moved with an unearned swagger, a predator who believed the hunt was already over. "Annalise, my dear." His voice carried on the wind, smooth and cloying. "You've led me on quite a chase. Come out now. You and the girl. I'm a forgiving man." Elias didn't move. Annalise didn't breathe. "I know you're in there with someone." Silas Blackwood called out, his voice losing its silken edge. Whoever you are, send out what's mine. That woman and child are my property, bought and paid for. I have the papers to prove it. Elias finally spoke, his voice carrying clear and cold. This is my property. You're not welcome on it. Turn around and ride away. Blackwood laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. Is that right? You think you can stand between a man and his rightful due? I am Silas Blackwood. People know my name. They fear it. You should too. I don't care if you're the devil himself, Elias said, raising his rifle, the barrel resting steady on the windowsill. You take one more step. It'll be your last. The challenge hung in the air. Blackwood stopped, his smile fading. He saw the cold certainty in the set of the man in the window. This was not some farmer he could intimidate. This was something else. His hand drifted towards the pistol at his hip. Then I'll just have to take what's mine, he snarled. The world exploded in a blur of motion. Blackwood drew his gun, but Elias was faster. The rifle cracked, the sound echoing off the mountains. Blackwood cried out, staggering back, his pistol flying from a hand that was suddenly a mess of blood. But he was tough. Fueled by rage, he charged the cabin, drawing a second pistol with his good hand. The front door splintered as he threw his shoulder against it. He burst inside, his face a mask of fury. Elias met him not with a gun, but with his body. They crashed to the floor, a tangle of limbs and grunts and raw violence. It was brutal, close quarters. Blackwood was strong, but Elias was powered by a righteous fury he hadn't felt in years. He was fighting for more than his own life. He was fighting for the flicker of hope that had taken root in his desolate heart. He was fighting for them. He saw Blackwood's eyes flick past him, towards Annalise and Lily cowering by the fire. Predatory gleam entered his gaze. After I'm done with you, I'll take my time with her, he hissed, trying to bring his pistol up. That was his final mistake. A cold, clear rage descended on Elias. He slammed Blackwood's gun hand against the floorboards again and again until the weapon dropped. Then his hands were on Blackwood's throat, squeezing the life and the lies from him. But Blackwood was slippery. He writhed, landing a solid punch to Elias's side that made him gasp. The grip loosened for a second, and Blackwood scrambled away, grabbing for his fallen pistol. He got it. He raised it, a triumphant sneer on his face, pointing it directly at Elias's chest. Then a second sound, louder than the first rifle shot, deafening in the enclosed space, blasted through the cabin. Blackwood jerked, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked down at the massive, bloody hole that had appeared in his chest. He looked over at Annalise, who stood with the shotgun still smoking in her hands, her face streaked with tears but her eyes blazing with a fire that could melt steel. He collapsed, his malevolence extinguished forever. The silence that followed was absolute. It was broken by a single, choked sob from Annalise. The shotgun clattered to the floor. Elias pushed himself up, his side screaming in protest where a rib had likely cracked. He looked at her, at this woman who had faced her monster and pulled the trigger. He saw not a victim but a warrior. He went to her, ignoring his own pain. He gently took her face in his hands. "It's over," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're safe." She fell against him, her body shaking with the aftermath of terror and adrenaline. And he held her, his arms a protective circle. And then, a small voice, thin and reedy, cut through the silence. "Manga." They both froze. They looked down. Lily was staring up at Annalise, her small hand clutching her mother's dress. Her dark, vacant eyes were clear now, and filled with a child's simple need. "Mama," she said again, a little stronger this time. Annalise slid to her knees, pulling Lily into a fierce embrace, her own sobs now ones of relief, of a dam breaking. Elias watched them, a profound ache in his chest. He looked at the body on the floor, the wreckage of the past, and then at the mother and child clinging to each other, the fragile, beautiful beginnings of a future. He stepped outside, needing the clean, cold air. The sun was breaking through the clouds, spilling liquid gold across the valley. The world felt new, washed clean. He looked at his hands, hands that had known death and violence, hands that had just protected a family. He was still a haunted man, but for the first time the ghosts were quiet. Spring arrived in earnest. The harsh angles of the winter landscape softened into green curves. Elias mended the fence where Annalise and Lily had collapsed, replacing the cruel wire with smooth, sturdy rails. He was not just fixing a boundary, he was building a home. Annalise planted a small garden, her hands in the rich soil, coaxing life from the earth. She taught Lily the names of the wildflowers that bloomed on the hillside. The child's voice, once a forgotten memory, was now a constant, happy murmur, weaving itself into the fabric of their days. One evening, the three of them sat on the porch, watching the sun set the mountains ablaze. Lily was asleep in Annalise's lap. The silence between them was no longer born of caution and pain, but of a deep, comfortable peace. Annalise looked at him, her eyes the color of a calm evening sky. "We could leave," she said softly. "Go to Oregon." Like I planned, Elias looked out at the vast expanse of his land, at the cabin that had once been his prison and was now his sanctuary. He looked at the woman beside him and the child in her arms. He had been a ghost, a man hiding at the edge of the world, but they had brought him back to life. "Or," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "You could stay." He turned his gaze to her, and for the first time, she saw no shadows in his eyes, only a clear, unwavering certainty. "This is a good place to grow things." She knew he wasn't just talking about the garden. She leaned her head against his shoulder, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. "Yes, here, home." He put his arm around her, holding his small, found family close as the first stars began to prick the vast, darkening sky. The wind whispered through the pines, no longer a predator, but a lullaby.